It must be the weekend. Whoops, my mic working? Okay, it's working. Anyway, so this weekend, my feed keeps blowing up with all this news that's going on because apparently New York Toy Fair is going on. And for people up here in Canada like me, it sort of just blows right by. And then I check my feed and there's all these reveals of everything from G.I. Joe to a little bit of mask stuff, He-Man. It just keeps on going. And on the same weekend, you've got ZoloCon happening in Pennsylvania, and there's a bunch of reveals going on there too. So I guess it's a good time to be a toy fan. I'm not really sure, but we're here to talk about. Well, we're here to bring one of my favorite people, writers, producers, to talk. Just because earlier this week you may have seen some news about the reemergence of Cold Slither, or should I say maybe the first emergence as far as collectible product is concerned. Either way, he'll come on and give us some information. But first thing I want to do is bring on the guest co-host for this show, which is one of my good friends, a ambassador for Delta 17 and a perpetual G.I. Joe fan, my good buddy Joe Ricondo.
What's up, everyone?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the setup behind you, and
Thank
we're going to
you.
bring Michael on in a second, but I want to... This is a custom setup.
Homegrown.
Homegrown, not provided for or provided by Delta 17. This is just an amazing custom setup that we should look to doing that officially because Joe is so passionate about stuff. He goes and gets his own official looking stuff that we may as well just make it official.
I owe a lot of money in copyright infringement.
You haven't sold anything.
Oh, the logos.
Anyway, I don't see why we should delay it all. But when I was growing up watching the Cold Slither episode as a kid, the music, the tune, Zartan rocking out, and a lot of other stuff as well. Like this guy has written the character of Devcon in the Transformers. That was this guy's creation, right? He has some credits on the return of Optimus Prime, some teleplay credits. But why am I reading his bibliography and resume out? He can do it for himself. Michael Charles Hill, welcome to the show, my friend.
Great. Thanks for having me on. And it's great to see you guys. I think this is our first time since we met at Joe Fest last summer.
It is.
Good to see you.
It feels like it was like 2 days ago that we were talking over the booth, and I was like, I'm so glad you're here, and you were walking the sales floor to look around, and Joe was all over the place at Joe Fest last year. He was helping out Sarge's breakfast and everything. It just feels like it's a good time to kind of get together. And I know we've been trying to coordinate this for a couple of months. Like last fall, I think Joe reached out to you about doing something like this. And then we all kind of forgot. We all kind of got busy. The Cold Slither news happened. And I'm like, I think we should revive this conversation. And now here we are.
It's a good time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I know some people are still filing into the chat, but for those who are here already, let's just say a quick hello.
Oh, Ken.
I do not think so, but it is a great idea. I think I just focused on the four main characters, and that was it.
Awesome. I take it you were answering the question because it's a good idea not to right-click out of StreamYard and kick yourself out by accident when you're hosting. That's what I did. Sorry. So I'm assuming you were answering the question about those.
I was, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for buying time like that because I'm sitting there. I'm like, why did my thing suddenly die off? I'm like, right, because I hit right-click and I hit back by accident, which is absolutely amazing thing to do when you're supposed to be hosting. But so Stanley's got his question answered. Joe has said hello to the chat. We got Dave, we got Rekship, we got Matthew Matson. Who else we got here? Joe Fan 84, and I think a few others are probably going to file in later on, and they'll get to laugh at my opening few minutes gaffe right there. And yes, Joe Fan, I think everybody loved Cold Slither. Yeah. So, Skyfall's here too. Thank you. And thank you for being a channel member, Skyfall and Scotty. See, the notifications for YouTube seem to go out a bit late, so then people kind of file in a bit later on. So maybe it's a good thing I screwed up at the beginning and bought us a bit of time. Michael, I mean, we may as well start off with can you give us a quick overview about how you got started in writing and in the animation industry?
Sure. See if I can keep this brief. In film school, I thought I wanted to be a director. And one instructor I had said, well, the shortcut to being a director is being a writer. And, I'd never thought about writing a screenplay before. So I set off to write my very first one. I don't think I finished it. It was terrible. And then I wrote, and they were all features because that's all I was thinking about was being a feature film director. So I wrote a few. Jump ahead to moving to Hollywood. There was what I jokingly like to call a fly-by-night film school called Sherwood Oaks Experimental College. The guy who ran that, Gary Shusett, his brother was Ronald, who co-wrote the original Alien script, and I'm drawing a blank. The Schwarzenegger film that was based on a Philip K. Dick novel and then remade. But in any event, Gary was great at bringing in current and retired Hollywood veterans, writers, directors, DPs, and teaching classes or having an evening seminar. And I loved those. And in one of those classes I took was a screenwriting class from John Milius. Unbeknownst to me, I was in the front of the room. Flint Dilley was in the back of the room. We hadn't met yet. Ultimately, we did. We started a writers group. I think there was about 6 of us who would meet every Monday night. We bring in pages, 10 pages of what we were working on, distribute copies, and then talk about the 10 pages we brought in the week before. So around this time, I don't know if anybody knows this or not, and this is Flint's story, but his family owned the rights to Buck Rogers. So Flint and his agent were shopping that around town to animation companies for a Saturday morning cartoon. Nobody was interested, but at Ruby Spears, they liked Flint enough to offer him a job. And I think he started working on Mr. T. And then he called me up and he said, hey, how would you like to get paid for writing? And I said, sure. Well, writing what? He goes, Saturday morning cartoons. And I said, sure. So he introduced me to story editor of a show called Dragon's Lair, which was based on Don Bluth's video arcade game. ABC had ordered 13. I ended up writing 4 of them, decided I really liked getting paid for writing as opposed to getting paid to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be on a soundstage or on location at 6, and decided to pursue it. But it was never, any kind of a goal or ambition of mine to write for animation. And I hadn't watched any cartoons since, I was a kid, which was primarily, Looney Tunes and Mighty Mouse and Felix the Cat and things like that. So I had no clue as to what was going on. I never saw any Scooby-Doo cartoons. So I had no clue what was happening on Saturday morning animation. And so that's how I got into it.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I know you've there's other. I know you've said before that sometimes in the writing industry things can be very like you have a plan and things go off the plan. Because I know, was it Ninja Holiday episode? You said that you were waiting for a script to come in on a Friday.
Yes.
It didn't show up Thursday night. You pulled an all-nighter, and next thing you know, we got Ninja Holiday.
Yeah, that's exactly how that one happened. No premise, no beat outline. I just made it up as I went along, so I knew I had to be done by the next morning. So
that's amazing. And for people who don't remember exactly which episode that is, that's the one where Wetsuit gets a letter in the mail to participate in a martial arts competition, an illegal one. And then Sergeant Slaughter kind of like intercepts the letter and then gets captured instead of Wetsuit and participates in the martial arts competition. Then the whole thing gets shut down. But I think, how did it go again? If the winner was supposed to go and take down Serpentor or something like that.
I can't remember either.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I just watched it too.
I remember I started with the idea of, it being my homage to Enter the Dragon. And that's about all I remember. of what I was facing the blank page with when I started writing it.
Right. Now, fair enough. Yeah. Now, transitioning a little bit because I know we're going to talk a little bit about Cold Slither later on, but for those of us who wish, and I know you've also mentioned that you wish you could have seen more of Devcon in the Transformers cartoon. Have you seen a rise in his popularity over the last few years, or has he always been kind of a sleeper hit for
Well,
Transformers fans?
for both franchises, I was out of the loop for almost 40 years. I had no idea what was going on. So really it was the first Transformer convention I was invited to was TFCon Toronto in the summer of 2023. I arrived late on a Friday night, and I think it was Colin was the one to tell me that Hasbro had come out with a figure. And I was very surprised because I had always I assumed that Hasbro would never even acknowledge his existence because he wasn't part of the original toy line. He wasn't created by Hasbro or anybody working at Hasbro. So I just thought they would pretend he didn't exist. So yeah, I was surprised, and I was at that convention, I was asked by many fans why he didn't appear in other episodes. And all I could do was blame myself because there wasn't sort of an overarching theme for the show in general. Every episode was pretty, with the exception of the miniseries, was pretty much a standalone episode. And part of the reason for that was there was no way that Cluster could guarantee that the shows would air in the order that they were written or produced. So trying to dovetail two episodes together would have been difficult. And also, while the 3 or 4 of us that were hired by Sunbow as writer-producers, and we all worked in the same office, all the other writers were freelance, and they were off doing their own thing. So only the story editor knew all the shows that were in develop. So one freelancer over here would have no idea what another freelancer was doing over there.
I see.
So in any event, long story short, before Marvel had opened their West Coast office and hired Flint and I and Steve Gerber and Buzz and Doug Booth, Marvel was still handling the creative aspect of Transformers as well, not just the production and post-production.
Cool.
And because the story that I pitched that the Marvel story editors liked involved this Transformer bounty hunter, I went down the list of all the Autobots, all the Decepticons, and none of them fit. And because nobody told me I couldn't create my own Transformer, I did.
That's awesome. And for people who may have forgotten or may be mostly G.I. Joe fans that may not know the Transformers line that well, like Joe and I are both huge Transformers and G.I. Joe fans. I think, Joe, safe to say that that's like the 1 and the 2 for you and me.
Yep.
Right. Which is why it's important to get you on here, because if there's one personal collection I have that's larger than my G.I. Joe collection, it is my Transformers collection. So that's why you see Devcon there next to Smokescreen. And you're right, Michael. I do believe that, like, looking at the list of Autobots, like, who could have actually been a bounty hunter? I mean, it's not going to be Ironhide. It's not going to be Bumblebee. It's probably not going to be Grimlock. They all have their strengths, but this sort of like one-man show that Devcon was is something that didn't really fit anybody else, and he's kind of become like this, exactly like you said, this thing like, hey, remember that character? He was pretty cool. What about we never got a toy? And when I look at the modern day Transformers, it's nice to get characters we never got in the original line. Alpha Trion, versions of Orion Pax, things like that. And Devcon's on that list because unlike Orion Pax, who was a predecessor, or Alpha Trion, who's more of a mentor that didn't really see a lot of battles, Devcon on your display shelf and for the purpose of your own like personal play pattern, he fits right in. You could have him go right into battle with the Autobots and almost be an Autobot. And that's what makes it so cool.
Yeah. So to finish up the where I started, um, because I thought he was a throwaway character, and because he wasn't a toy, it never occurred to me that once Sunbow hired me to, and I was actually producing the show, it never occurred to me, and I kick myself for it now, to bring him back into any of the other episodes that I wrote or even pitched.
Hmm. Yeah, he's almost like a little more precious to us because he got so little screen time, and with him being a bounty hunter, and with Boba Fett being such a big character in Star Wars, he also got very little screen time.
Yes. And I have to admit, Boba Fett was my favorite Star Wars character at the time, and he was my inspiration.
Awesome. So with regards to the Transformers, now I know you also wrote the Starscream's Brigade episode, and the return of Starscream as a ghost. Would you then be the person who came up with the idea of the origin story for the Combaticons and the whole idea of Ghost Starscream? Did both of those come from you?
Yes.
Wow.
Starting with Starscream's Brigade, as the producer on the show, I would be, at least at Sunbow West, the first person to get a fax from Hasbro, letting us know the new characters that were coming down, or new figures that were coming down the pike, and requesting that we start creating stories that they would appear in, so that by the time they aired would be close to the time they hit the shelves. Makes perfect business sense.
Yes.
So when I got the list of the combiners, I went down them, and I saw the Combaticons and Bruticus, and I said, "Oh, I can do something with that. I'm going to snag that for myself." So all I knew was what they looked like and their brief bios, but I created the origin story for them, which at the time I think I was thinking, well, we haven't done this before. This might be kind of interesting.
It is. It is. Yeah. Because they wash up on shore, right? And they've been left over from World War II, I believe. And then Starscream finds them and brings them to life. So that's why you're using like World War II era vehicles, which is just like, it's one of the things that really stands out.
And also ties back to the John Milius screenwriting class that Flint and I took. At one point, he was talking about how ideas aren't, well, I used a stronger word, but basically ideas are, all screenwriters' ideas are crap, but they like to keep them secret, not tell anybody, because afraid someone will steal them. So he said, I'll tell you all right now. I'm going to go home tonight. I'm going to start writing a screenplay about Guadalcanal. And you can all go home and write your screenplay about Guadalcanal, and mine will still be better. So the whole idea of Guadalcanal as the opening scene of Starscream's Brigade was based on that story that Milius told us.
No, fair enough. And now, while you said that Devcon didn't get a figure for a long time and wasn't recognized, certainly Ghost Starscream was an easy thing for people to jump on because you get a clear Starscream. You use the same mold. And,
yes. And again, until that convention in Toronto, I didn't even know he existed or that he was a thing. And how this came about was, Flint and I, our offices, we shared a common wall. So we were in and out of each other's office all the time. And I happened to be in there one day, and I just casually mentioned, "Oh, it's too bad you killed Starscream off in the movie," because he was always fun to write for. And he said to me, "Who said he's dead?" And I went, I can do something with that. So that's how Starscream's Ghost was born. But again, I didn't know that he'd become a thing. And then even though her episode ran before mine, Meg McLaughlin wrote Starscream's Ghost. But where mine is kind of a sequel to the movie, hers, I looked at it recently, and I can't tell if it's a prequel or a sequel to mine, or how it sort of dovetails into the other two ideas. But Yeah, as I said, I didn't know that Starscream's ghost had become a thing.
But now that I know that it can be traced back to you, it makes me want to track down another one much more quickly. 'Cause I don't know about you, Joe, but a lot of times, like I'll get something in my collection and I'll be like, I already have a Starscream, and I'll
Yep.
sell or trade the other one, not thinking there's a reason why it's clear.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now that I know Michael, I'm kind of like, well, not kind of want to have one, right? Again, right? So
Yeah, I guess I should get one too.
we'll keep an eye out for you. So thank you for those. I mean, I know people are probably here to maybe talk about the GI Joe stuff more, as that's how I kind of advertise this. And I know GI Joe's been more in the news lately, but is there one specific creation you get asked about more than others of all the things you've created, whether it's Special Missions Brazil or whatever?
Frankly, not a lot about Special Mission Brazil, only because I wasn't credited on the box or the audio cassette or anything like that. So nobody even knew until a little over a year ago that I had created Claymore and Special Mission Brazil. I think the thing, obviously, Cold Slither, which again I didn't know had become a thing. I get asked a lot about, and Devcon and Starscream's Brigade.
Okay, that's fair. Joe, did you have anything I mean, you've been sitting here quietly, patiently waiting your turn. Did you have anything you want to throw in there?
I'm taking it all in, man. This is awesome. Charles, I remember you talking to me at Joe Fest, and I thought it was neat how you said that, like, Sarge used to call in his lines on the phone, and you'd record them.
Yes, yeah.
That's amazing, because it doesn't sound like it's a phone conversation in the cartoon.
I know. Because part of my job for both G.I. Joe and Transformers was to sit in and supervise all the recording sessions. So I'd be behind the glass with Wally and his engineer. And all the voiceover actors would come in as a group to record. Now, when we first started out, it would be an all-day affair. In the morning, we literally did a table read and go through the whole script. And then after lunch, we'd record it. Well, as time went by, some of the actors, were double booked for the day. And so they would prefer, let's just come in, let's just do this thing. And in some cases, it's like, oh, I've only got 6 lines. Let me just record mine, and then I can go over the hill to another session. But Sergeant Slaughter, living in, I think, Connecticut at the time, never was in any of these sessions. So we would call him up on the phone, and Wally would direct him, and he would record those lines. Now, at the time, I thought it was pretty cool. Looking back, hard to believe the technology was good enough that when you watch the episode, you can't tell that he wasn't in the room.
Part of it is his voice, like he kind of growls it out a little bit, and that maybe drowns it out a little bit. Then you do a bit of sound mixing, but this is also 1980s sound mixing. It's certainly not 2020s sound mixing.
So Sergeant Slaughter and I had never met until Joe Fest.
Wow.
Like last Joe Fest.
Last Joe Fest, yeah.
Wow.
And then we met again at Joe Lanta last August.
That's cool.
And it was great, hanging out with him a little bit and hear some stories. And
speaking of the writing and everything, one thing I did notice that you'd mentioned to Dave from Needless Things is that, and I never really understood what it meant, because you're given what's called a teleplay credit on the Return of Optimus Prime Part 2, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really understood what teleplay meant, but I believe you actually explained that. And I found that quite fascinating, is that story idea, and then teleplay is like the execution of the flow of the episode.
Right, which was kind of a common practice in TV writing in the 70s and 80s. But I could have easily have just left it written by Michael Charles Hill. But I didn't want to take any credit away from Marv and Cherry, I think his co-writer was, because they had written Part 1, and they had come up with the story. And even though I only had like maybe 5 pages of an outline to work from. And then I embellished the story afterwards. I felt it was really important to make sure that they still got credit for the story idea, and I only got credit for actually writing the script.
But it is an emotional finish to it because, for people who maybe need a refresher, Optimus like goes into the Matrix and he's about to get smashed by Galvatron. Then he opens the Matrix and empties out the wisdom of the Matrix, and the Matrix is empty at the end. And when they roll out to the final scene of Stan Bush's The Touch. I don't know if that was your idea to get that in there or not.
That was because part of the mission for writing these 2 episodes was the backlash that Hasbro received for killing off Optimus Prime in the movie. So by these 2 episodes bringing him back to life, I wanted the audience to in some ways re-experience the things they loved about the movie. So yeah, I wrote in a bit about the song.
Wow. Because I don't know about everybody else, but like when Optimus died, I was 4 years old. I had just come to Canada a few months earlier, and I found that Optimus dies. So when he comes back, by the time he comes back, I'm 5 years old. And does the impact it has on a kid at that age to lose Optimus and then get him back? It felt like an eternity that he was gone. Like it didn't feel like it was only 8 months or 10 months or whatever it was. It felt like it was 4 years.
Yeah.
Right. But like the way that you wrote that with him almost getting smashed, seeking wisdom from Alpha Trion and the previous bearers of the Matrix, and then opening it up and having it end with him curing the entire universe of the hate plague. I'm reliving it all right now as a 5-year-old kid, and I didn't know for the longest time I had you to thank for it, right? And the execution of getting like, it just rocks out to Stan Bush's The Touch, and I can see my 5-year-old self like humming that tune out. Right. So just so you know, you probably understand the impact, but I'm putting it out there on air, recorded at this point in time, so that people understand like just how important that scene, that clip, tying it all up was.
No, I actually love hearing these stories because at the time we were working on the show, obviously there was no real internet to speak of as we know it today. So we had no idea how these shows were being received. We weren't getting fan mail the way, folks at Marvel Comics or DC Comics would get. I suspect maybe Hasbro was. I don't think they were sharing any of that with us. All we knew was how well we were doing in the ratings. So mostly, aside from the fact working on those shows was kind of like a sausage factory too. We had to, just keep pumping out new scripts every week. We were mostly writing to sort of entertain ourselves and entertain each other. Sitting around saying, "Oh, it wouldn't be cool if we did this." And if somebody else in the room was kind of excited about that idea, then we'd go off and write it. But we also assumed, both with G.I. Joe and Transformers, that, in 2 years, the show would be canceled. Some other bright, new, shiny object would come along and be made into a toy, and nobody would remember G.I. Joe and Transformers. And I personally, with every script I wrote, even though I was writing something, to entertain myself or something I thought was interesting, I just automatically assumed it would be, for the people watching the show, it would be everyone's least favorite episode. And that goes, especially Cold Slither.
Well, for what it's worth, a kid like me who rented the VHS for The Return of Optimus Prime, those last few minutes, I would rewind and play and rewind and play over and over and over again, not realizing the dude on the other side who wrote it never thought that this would happen and it would impact, and we'd be here talking about it nearly 4 decades later. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's cool. I love hearing these stories.
Yeah. Anyway, it's funny. We're 30 minutes in and I barely asked you about Cold Slither. And I've got that on the thumbnail advertised and everything. So sorry for those in the audience. I'm sitting here fanboying,
Yeah.
like a 5-year-old again. Yeah. But Joe's here to keep me on track. Not that he's needed to, but he's here to keep me on track. Maybe I should ask, how did the idea for Cold Slither come up?
This is what happens to me. I like to think it happens to a lot of other writers, but I will slave away when you first are even allowed to pitch stories. Usually a story editor would request a minimum number of ideas that they can pick from. Let's, say 3, maybe 5. And so I'll slave away at stories, and I always end up finding myself one short. So then, but the others are really well thought out. I know exactly what I'm going to do with them, even though their premises, they're like a page and a half long, and I know the act breaks, and I know the big beats, and then I'll come up with a throwaway idea that's 2 sentences, maybe 3 sentences long. It's like a log line in a TV guide. And invariably, that's the one that always gets picked. And so Cold Slither was that one, which I didn't think anybody would like, but at least I made my minimum number of submissions. So when it happens to me, it's always, oh crap, now I got to figure out what this story's about. So basically, the essence of it was 2 things. It was a twist on the Pied Piper story, and it was my making fun of heavy metal music, which I was not a fan of. And the same thing when I wrote the song, which I didn't know I was going to have to do when I wrote the script. I intentionally set out to write a bad heavy metal song, and I didn't know until recently that I failed epically.
So the fact that Cold Slither succeeded is almost like a failure because of what you were trying to do. Wow, that's awesome. So basically the filler throwaway idea was the one they picked, which is hilarious in hindsight.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you remember where you were when you first saw Cold Slither, Joe? The episode?
It probably was on my grandmother's couch. Watching it after school, for sure. And I dug it. I was into it.
Well, I feel like it's one of those shows nobody's on the fence about. They either, which is better than I was expecting. But I mean, I now find out they either love it or they hate it. And the ones that hate it, that's what I was expecting all along anyway. So I'm not offended by it at all.
That's awesome. Because I specifically remember that. I don't remember if it was, sorry, I remember what happened, but whether it was before school I was watching or on a Saturday morning I was watching. But like I watched the episode and I didn't really know what to make of it, but I was fascinated because it was so different. And because the final scene is the Joes kind of take over the concert and go on stage and sing and sing kind of their theme song. Well, my older brother walks in right at that point. And he's looking at it out of context and he's laughing. He's like, "What are you watching? This is so silly." And I'm like, "You gotta see the rest of the episode first." You know what I mean? He's like, "Why are they singing their theme song on stage?" And I'm like, no, you understand. Like, we got to rewind like 23 minutes right now. And he just wasn't getting it. But
yeah.
And
yeah, I needed a way out of the story. So at the last minute, I thought, oh, the Joes, and I wasn't even thinking if these would really be the right Joes, but the Joes who were already part of the story, instead of introducing a new character at the end of the 3rd act, I know they'll jump on the stage, and I wasn't even thinking about how weird it is that they would be singing their own theme song. All I was thinking was, oh, I'll call them the Average Joe Band, which was a take on the Average White Band. So,
but you only got 22 or 23 minutes to work with. How do you tie it up for a 6-year-old? And the funny thing is, in the 2000s, I bought the DVD set, and what happens as I'm watching the DVD set in the den room of the house I was living in at the time, and we get to that part. Who walks in again? My brother. And he's like, "Oh, I remember this. Are they going to take over the? Are they going to take over?" I'm like, "Never mind. I didn't want to relive my 6-year-old self, having my brother like shame me for watching something a little bit silly without context. Which, admittedly, he had no issue with GI Joe. He just didn't see it in context. Right? Yeah. I'm seeing him for dinner tonight, so I'll be sure to tell him this story. Awesome. Well, anything to add, Joe?
While I was at Joe Fest last year, I picked up the Cold Slither Lost demo.
Oh, yeah.
And Michael signed it for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's one of my most cherished items in my cabinet. And I think this has an extended version too, I believe.
Yes, it's a recreation that was done for Assembly Required 2023.
Yep.
And Chad Baker, who's become a good friend of mine, but he and Brian Sauer, who is the showrunner for Assembly Required, are good friends. Chad's a copywriter at an advertising agency. And he, unbeknownst to me, had written a couple of new verses, which are brilliant and feel like I would have written them because they're coming kind of from the same place. And then between Chad and Brian, they had musician friends who re-recorded the song because, I knew when I originally wrote the song, it wasn't going to be more than 30 seconds long. So I think I only wrote like 3 verses, maybe 4.
Right. Fair enough. So what was I going to say a moment ago? Well, I've lost my train of thought, so wouldn't be a live show if everything went according to plan. Oh, that was it. Dak Nomad, who you would have met at Assembly Required.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, he messaged me as soon as I announced the stream was going up. He literally messaged me. He goes, "Oh, I'm so glad you got Michael coming on. He's like one of my favorite." He might even said his favorite guest. I can't remember exactly.
Wow.
But he sent his regards.
And Dak is a good guy. Dak and his wife. Yeah, I met and I first met Dak at Assembly Required 2023, my first GI Joe convention, and I was really nervous about it, but I just met so many great people that all put me at ease right away, and loved going back last year, and hopefully they'll have me again in the near future.
Well, fingers crossed, because the one thing, and Joe will know what I'm talking about. When we met you at Joe Fest last year, and we were talking about like the people who were largely behind GI Joe, even Transformers. When you talk about Larry Hama, Kirk Bazigian. If you go to the Transformers world, there's Bob Budiansky or Simon Furman and those people. When we bring up your name, we always use the same term, and Joe knows what I'm going to say: hidden gem.
Yep.
Because, like you say, a lot of your experiences are from 2023-ish, and we're sitting here going, did it take us this long to actually recognize what this guy did?
Well, I remember Hoodie Cobra Commander came back from Assembly Required in 23, and he went live. He does a live stream every week. He used to. And he was like, "Guys, I met the guy that created Claymore's file card. I never knew this. This is on, New Joe news." And we're kind of floored about it. And then, Michael, I got to say, too, you're also a very approachable person. You're very nice. You're very warm and accepting when people come up to talk to you. You're not grumpy or anything like that.
Well, it would never occur to me to be, but when I hear that, it makes me wonder, have you and other people have said something similar, have a lot of experience with grumpy guests?
Sometimes.
Oh, okay.
I've seen it happen with pro athletes more so than in our industry, but it does happen in this one too. So
the wrestlers, I know, like, I don't want to mention his name, but I ran into an angry wrestling guy at a wrestling show I was at. Like, he didn't want to be there. He was kind of forced to be there, it seemed. And
Yeah, I remember somebody came up to me and said, "Oh man, I can't believe that you're hanging out with the fans or the vendors after hours." And I said, well, it would never occur to me not to. You know, I didn't come all the way here to, you know, stay in my room unless I actually had to be on the floor. So.
No, and you know, like Joe said, you were very approachable with us last Joe Fest. It's kind of like hanging out with one of the boys kind of thing is,
Yeah.
and that's what we really appreciate. So
Well, I enjoy it because, again, I was out of the loop for so long. There's my knowledge is limited to the, you know, my tour of duty at Sunbow and what I worked on, and I find that you guys and most all the other fans know far more about G.I. Joe and Transformers than I do. So, you know, it's a nice education for me. But, you know, for a while, I wasn't even aware conventions were going on. Because, again, I just, you know, when I was done writing animation, I was doing a lot of other things. I was editor, you know, comic book editor at DC and Walt Disney, and I was head of acquisitions for an indie film distribution company. I was creative director at Mirage for the
TMNT. Yeah, that's right.
I started a film festival in Vermont. So I just really wasn't plugged in to what was happening with things that I had worked on.
Yeah, I know you did some stuff for Gem and the Holograms too.
I wrote one episode under protest. Yeah.
Was that the one? I'm trying to remember what you and David from Needless Things talked about. Was that the one where Jerica / Gem's mom dies?
Yes.
So I'm trying to remember how it went, but whether it was a two-parter or not. But it's the one where her mother is also a singer or a musician?
She was a folk singer in the 60s and was killed in a plane crash while on tour when Gem / Jerica and the girls were young girls. So basically the gag of the episode is that one of the girls finds their father, who's also dead, diary in the attic. And so as they're reading through the diary, then we flash back to the scene from that entry.
And I believe she doesn't want her mom to go on tour, and I believe they had an argument, if I recall correctly. So she doesn't want her to get on the plane, and the last time she talked to her mom was they had an argument, and it haunts Gem for years and years. That's funny it makes sense that a G.I. Joe or Transformers writer would write this because that's the episode I remember best. That's the one where, like, I don't like to leave my parents' place in an argument, partly. I know it sounds weird, but like because I saw an episode like that, and it was like the one Gem episode I remember really, really well, you know.
And I remember thinking, you know, the one caveat that we had with both G.I. Joe and Transformers is nobody could die. I mean, not in a TV series, which is, you know, how we ended up. Everybody fires lasers instead of bullets, and of course still misses. So when I wrote that scene of how Gem's mother or Jerica's mother was killed, I thought for sure Hasbro would say, "Oh, you can't do this. No, we don't. We're not doing this show." And that was my intent, was to get them to not make me write the script. But they loved it. But you know how it came about is, in addition to my contract with Sunbow as a producer, I had a separate contract as a writer, and I was which guaranteed me a minimum number of scripts per year. Getting close to the end of my renewing my contract, and I still had 3 scripts left to do. So I thought I was going to get paid not to write, because that was the deal. But they didn't want to pay me not to write. So that's how I found out I was going to have to do this Gem script. And that's how I actually ended up doing part 2 of The Return of Optimus Prime too.
Which we're glad that happened, right? So here we are 45 minutes in, and I finally get to ask you, when this dropped a few days ago, the image on screen, how did you feel?
I was, well, first of all, the first thing I noticed was messages in both Instagram and Facebook were blowing up. And then I think at the top of my feed, I saw this image and I went, wait, what? What is this? So I was as much surprised as everyone else. I will say, though, a couple of people who claim, and I have no reason not to believe them, that they had inside sources at Hasbro last June at Robo Toy Fest told me that Hasbro was working on something about Cold Slither. But I forgot about it. And then I met Brian Flynn from Super 7 at Joe Fest last June. And he told me that they were planning on, Cold Slither Zartan. And, I said, well, when's this going to be released? And he said, well, he kept talking about the third wave, which meant nothing to me. He said he would keep me in the loop and maybe see if they can involve me in the, promotion of it when it comes out. But I never heard anything from him again. So I was not expecting the breaking news that happened the other day, plus the record album, plus the Skybound comic book, which nobody had told me rumors about that one at all.
Interesting. Well, I don't know about you, Joe, but I actually see myself buying this O-ring one.
Yes.
The other one with being an SDCC box set and classified taking a bit more space and all the band equipment that's there, I kind of like this one for the reason that it's a figure that we could have had in an alternate universe as a kid, and we got Ninja Force Zartan, which kind of has some flamboyance to it, but it's a little different, right? And
let's just say they're not going to do the rest of them though. If they're doing this one, they might come out with the rest of them in another wave.
Well, then let's hope so.
I'd like to think they would, especially if this is well received.
It will be, for sure. James Hitchcock will be.
Oh, yeah. Yes, he will.
What I like about this is it goes into like a regular standard, like Joe-sized card, right? Because, for example, this is the Sarge from the Triple T crossover Transformers item, right? Like, this is the kind of thing that I'd love to get, like, say, Sergeant Slaughter to sign. There's a leather neck over there that I'd love Ron Rudat to sign. This item you're looking at on screen is exactly the item I'd like to see Michael sign. If I ever have the chance, if I see you again at a convention, I'd love to bring it over, sleeve it in one of these things, have you sign the front, and just be like, let's party, get the get that.
Although I don't have many shows booked yet this year, and none actually for after when these are available. So, but if I do, I imagine I'll be signing a lot of these.
Yes, like that's the plan, and I hope when people hear that, they, whether they like Super 7 or not, because it's not everyone's cup of tea. Some people said they didn't like the lack of detail on some of the figures they've already put out. Understandable, right? But this is a novelty item, right?
Yes.
So if there's one item from this series I really want, it's this one. The Wild Bill looks good too, but I've already got a Wild Bill that fills the same gap. This other one's just anime tune color. This is a completely different Zartan, right? The Hypnosis Zartan. So yeah, I don't know how much time you've got, but I've definitely got a little bit more time for sure. And I'm glad you made time today, because I know
no, I don't have a cutoff, so it's
good.
If you want to go a little longer, that's not a problem.
Awesome. I mean, one of the questions I have written on here is there a certain episode or episodes that you're more proud of than others that you wrote, regardless of how successful they were?
I mean, I had for different reasons, I had a lot of fun on most of them, but I think the one I really loved writing was The Burden Hardest to Bear for Transformers.
That's a deep one.
Because it really, tied into my love for Japanese culture, history, samurai code of honor, all that stuff. So it was fun to tell that story.
And for the ones in the audience who may not have seen the Bird and Hardest of Air Transformer story, that's the one where Rodimus Prime is struggling with filling the shoes of Optimus Prime because he's now the leader and he can never really live up to him. And he doesn't want to, but he kind of gets eventually, he goes and kind of finds himself, and that's how he does it. So
yeah, and he was a new character that, you know, Hasbro dumped on us that I really had a hard time relating to. And then, of course, you know, with the movie, well, now we're really stuck with this guy. So I found an angle of attack that worked for me that I thought I could tell an interesting story with.
But it fits right in with everything else that was written at the time, and if anything, it helps stand out and accentuate that aspect of that character to separate him so that he's not just another Optimus, right? Mm-hmm. He has a level of doubt because he's not a father figure like Optimus. He's the hotshot rookie who has the Matrix and is accepting responsibility. He's almost like an underdog leader because a lot of people didn't like Rodimus at the time.
Oh, yeah.
I admit I struggled with it. Watching that episode is what separates him and kind of makes him like become his own character almost in some ways. So.
Yeah. I mean, he was like, you know, a teenager who became king. He wasn't prepared for it all. And I know a lot of fans complain about his incessant whining even within my episode. But
part of the character.
I had some empathy for him as a character who had this thing thrust upon him that he wasn't ready for, and you know, finally found somebody he could talk to about it.
And yet here we are decades later. You're thinking in your head, this episode may be forgotten in a few months' time.
Oh, yeah.
4 decades later, you know, we're sitting there saying it helped make the character what it was. Like, it's like an essential, if you're going to do a character arc of Rodimus Prime / Hot Rod, that's in there. Mm-hmm. You know, that's something. So yeah, no, that's pretty amazing. And you did some work on Cops and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you said as well?
Yes. Cops, Carl Masick, I think.
Yeah. The Robotech guy.
Creator on that. And we had done some work together before. He had a company called Streamline.
Pictures.
So he had me write some English language scripts for dubbing into the Japanese prints. So I worked on Cops, RoboCop. For Mirage, that was interesting. I was working with an animator whose name completely escapes me now, in New York City. His father had worked at MGM Animation back in the 50s. And I got a phone. I was at DC Comics as an editor, and I got a phone call from the entertainment attorney for Peter and Kevin at Mirage.
Yep.
And they were looking for an animation consultant. And my friend Mark, and his last name will come to me shortly, begins with a Z, had recommended me to Fred Fierce, the Mirage lawyer. So essentially what they wanted me to do originally was the deal that Kevin and Peter had with Fred Wolf Films for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle animated TV series was that every script that was written would be sent to them, and they'd have 10 days to make notes and ask for changes. Now, whether Fred was obligated to make those changes or not, I don't remember. But they felt that they didn't know enough about animation to give those kind of notes. I know they didn't want a female turtle that much. So that's what I was hired to do. Then as time went on, they asked me to write a brand new Bible for the show because the three of us were fans of the Batman animated TV series at the time. And we were sitting around talking and said, oh, that's what the Turtle show should be like. Go back to the roots of your black and white comics. And so they had me write a new Bible that would be more reflective of the original comic book and akin to the Batman series. And then they had me write a script for a Christmas special that they were going to finance, that was based on one of their comic book stories. So all of that I did in the first year. And then Judy Price at CBS said no to the new Bible. Essentially, a business decision. She said, I spend $250,000 per episode. We're the #1 show. Warner Brothers spends $500,000 per episode for Batman. If I spend $500,000, I'm still the #1 show. Why would I spend the extra $250,000? And I think the budget that Fred Wolf prepared for the Christmas special was a little more than Peter and Kevin wanted to spend, so that ended up not happening. But anyway, after a year, then they hired me on staff. So
That's cool.
Mirage was publishing and licensing. So I was creative director for publishing, and I was director of special projects for licensing. So
Awesome.
I was with them for 3 or 4 years.
And going back to Streamline Pictures, which you talked about earlier, that's actually pretty cool that you got to know Carl Masek.
Oh, Carl was a great guy. Yeah, I one of the projects I wrote a script for was it Space Cobra Adventure or something?
Well, I mean, he brought a lot of animes over and is in many ways what we call the progenitor of bringing anime into North America. And I know a lot of people didn't like that because some of the Streamline Picture stuff, while you dubbed it over, sometimes certain things got rewritten and you lost a little bit of context, or you changed it to be more palatable to North American, because you would have done it directly. So you would have actually done some of that, right?
Yes and no. There was it was Space Adventure Cobra. That's the name of the film. And there was a line in there. They were talking about money, but they gave it a specific name. And I said, well, no one will know what this means. Let me change it. He goes, no, can't change anything. So obviously I had changed dialogue to fit lip sync.
Yeah.
But I couldn't create new words for other words. He wanted to honor the original translation. So.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So you would keep the original meaning, even if you had to alter words.
Yes.
I see. That's cool. That's cool, because I know that Carl, depending on the movie or depending on which part of his career we're talking about, some stuff was honored very heavily, like probably I guess in the era you were working for him, and some was like changed heavily, and like Robotech and some other works I heard were. It keeps coming up in the chat, and thank you, Dave, for pointing this out. He said that the Cold Slither box is on GDL's Geek Dad Life's Discord right now. I don't have the ability to pull that up, so I went straight to Full Force Podcast, who has pulled up the box for Cold Slither.
Oh, wow.
There it is. I guess they're at New York Toy Fair right now.
Now, I just before we got, I saw the front and the back. I wish they had opened it up, because my understanding, it's supposed to fold out into a stage. Had you heard that or read that?
I'm just seeing it right now, so I've not read for anything.
It looks like it would.
Yeah.
The way it's shaped and everything.
Yeah. It's angled in a way like it's not just in a rectangular box, so that would make sense. Huh. Interesting. Wow. It's thanks for everyone for bringing that to our attention here. So very awesome that people are talking about it now while we're here.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I want to plus in one of the comments from one of the patrons here, K-Dog Broadcasting.
I was trying to star that, Ken, but I didn't know how or nothing.
Oh, I would have to give you StreamYard controls to start.
Oh,
you would have to type in the private chat, get to K-Dog's question. That's probably the best way. Probably the best way you could do it. Yeah, unless I give you. Well,
I don't.
Long story short, I don't even own this StreamYard. My friend does.
Don't worry about it.
He has a question for you, Michael.
Yes.
About development. How much of an obstacle is it to showcase new toys? in a comic and cartoon, and you get to pick personality traits, or is it mandated towards you?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about it earlier. Hasbro would send us faxes with line drawings of new figures or vehicles, and it was probably, I don't know if it was done in house or Bob Budiansky did it, but there'd be a short bio of the character, personality trait. Maybe if they had a very specific way of talking, there'd be a sample line of dialogue. So that was baked in. That's what we had to work with. Now, as long as we included all that, then, you know, we could paint outside the lines a little bit. But yes, we'd get those I'd get those faxes periodically from Hasbro because it was important to them, in order to keep selling new toys, that we start introducing new characters into the episodes and create stories for them.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you for taking the time to answer that. Are you sitting on a glut of questions, Joe, or are you just sitting quiet?
No, I mean, I've spent a lot of time with Mike at Joe Fest in 24. We hit it off, I thought. And, you ended up having to leave early. Remember, your plane was booked?
Yeah. There was a couple of hiccups that weekend.
And then I know nothing's set in stone for you this year yet, but we're hoping to get you there.
Well, I would love to be there, but nobody in management has reached out to me, and so I don't expect that I'll be there.
Now, I think a week later is the Dallas Fort Worth show. I think, are you going to be at that one, or?
Yes.
Okay.
EFW?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So there we go. So you're going to be somewhere around that time of year.
Yeah. And, maybe also in June, might be the week before or 2 weeks before, I'll be at BotCon in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Yes.
Okay.
That's cool. I mean, with regards to Joe Fest, I don't necessarily know the ins and outs, but I do know that sometimes guests change from year to year. I think the only real constant really is Sergeant Slaughter, right?
Yeah.
So other than, but that's partly because he lives in the Carolinas, like it's drivable for him, right? So, certainly it's one of those things. If you don't come this year, people will be in their ear saying, "Hey, we missed him in 25. Can we get him in 26?" Like, it's one of those things. Because I do know there's other guests who have not been reached out to.
Yeah, I think my friend Jamie, this is the first time he's been invited to. Jamie Sullivan, the artist.
Yep.
So I'm very excited for him.
Yeah, and I believe, I don't know the ins and outs of Joe Fest in this regard, but I know a lot of conventions, they have a certain budget they work with, and then they sort of like, okay, these one or two guests are easy to get there, and we have to get them every year anyway, like a Sarge. Everyone else is kind of a rotating thing. Okay, we had them last year, we'll skip them this year, we'll recircle back next year, because sometimes guests miss a year, and then they come back 2 years later. And so I don't think it's the last we've seen of you as far as that's concerned, right? Especially as your name, like we were talking about, the whole hidden gem thing, which I think is going to be our nickname for you now. Now that your name's kind of making the rounds, you'll no longer be the hidden gem. You'll become the gem. That makes sense.
Well, actually, you brought that up earlier. I was kind of aware, but from a distance, these events were happening. And then finally in 2014, BotCon, which, as I understand it, was run by a completely different outfit than it is today.
Yeah.
Was in Pasadena, California. Really easy to get to me. No, and I find out one of the exclusives is a Devcon figure. And but nobody reached out to me. And I thought, well, I'm on Facebook. My name is on the episode. As a producer of the show, I'm on almost every episode. It shouldn't be that hard to kind of track me down. Especially if you already know Flint and Buzz, Flint Dilley and Buzz Dixon, they know how to get a hold of me. So I finally contacted BotCon. I said, introduced myself. I said, gee, it'd be really nice if I could get one of these because, Hasbro's never bothered to make one, and I doubt they ever will. And he said, oh, yeah, come on by. So I came by, introduced, went to the front registration area, introduced myself, ended up waiting 15 minutes for somebody who came down with a little plastic bag, handed it to me and said, well, thanks for stopping by. And I said, well, I'm here. I wrote a number of shows. I worked at Sunbow. If you want, you can take advantage of the fact that I'm here and, with panels or something. It's, oh, no, we're good. So it led me to believe two things. One is fans only cared about voiceover actors. And two, and more importantly to me, is that nobody cared about any of the episodes that I wrote. And so I decided I was okay with that. And I just went again, on with my life and never, because, outside of fandom, I've never had any and outside of Flint and Buzz and people I worked with, I've never had a reason to talk about working on G.I. Joe or Transformers. And most people in my life had no idea that I had. So it wasn't.
I think this is the figure, right?
Yes.
Yes. So it wasn't until almost 10 years later that Colin Douglas invited me to my first full-scale Transformer convention.
Wow.
And I had a great time. And I said, "Oh, I'd like to do more of these."
Wow. So that image was from TF Source. I just found it in the background here. So thanks to them and credit to them. And all the images right now, I got them either from Full Force or somebody. Some are directly images from the cartoon. Some are from Super 7 directly. Some are from Hasbro directly. Anyway, credits out there. It's a little saddening to hear that that's how you were treated, probably because they were so busy that you kind of became an afterthought. See, other people in the comments, they feel that way too. Because here you're thinking nobody cares about the episode. And yet I'm telling you how I felt about the return of Optimus Prime, Cold Slither. Joe's nodding in agreement. People in the audience are nodding in agreement. And that's not how we've just felt the last couple of years. We've felt that way since we saw the episodes.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Right.
Well, I'm slowly becoming aware of that. But yeah. For the longest time,
you told me that story at Joe Fest, and I was just like, what?
Yeah. And I was okay with it. Sometimes I'd be thinking, well, how come Flint's always invited to these things? I was there too. But,
he has a G.I. Joe named after him, right?
Well, that's I think the Flint came before Flint was involved, but it doesn't hurt.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. I just assumed, but you see how I just assumed, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, right? So, okay, no, that's cool. Well, the part about you being snubbed from BotCon is not cool, but because it's like normally you got to either pay accommodations or something for a guest. They could have easily just said, "Hey, why don't you walk the floor for here's a pass, go walk the floor." We'll introduce you to the organizers and some of whoever is interested. You might even see some old friends there. Right?
Yeah.
And that would have been nice not to be left in the cold in the lobby like that. It's like, okay, can I at least go in? Like, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I was surprised, but I just assumed, well, my name just had no marquee value whatsoever. Even though, as I said, one of the 5 exclusives was a character I created.
Yes. And I think that was the first Devcon before we got the retail, because the one I held up was like the first retail version of it, I believe. And then the Devcon from BotCon, I think it was just the first like resurrection of it, because I think it was a repaint of something else. I got to do more research.
I think somebody told me Blur, maybe.
Okay, that would make sense. Generations Blur or something like that. I'm a little bit rusty on that era of Transformers right now, but like that era of modern releases. But okay, that makes sense. Do you know the answer to K-Dog's question here?
Yes. I wrote 6 Transformer episodes. I think they were all season 2 and season 3.
And that includes a teleplay of Return of Optimus.
Right. Okay. And G.I. Joe, I think I did 3 at Sunbow. including the final episode of season 2. But because I created the coil,
Yes.
that was going to be the thrust of season 3. So that's what Buzz and I were pitching to Hasbro. And then I ended up writing 2 more G.I. Joes for Deke, which I did because Doug Booth asked me to. Doug worked with us at Sunbow. He was a story editor at Deke. And but I had worked for Deke before because I had because I had they hired me because of my experience writing English dialogue for Japanese anime. They hired me to write a pilot episode of Sailor Moon.
Ah, yes.
But I was very familiar with their quality of animation. So to this day, I have never seen the G.I. Joe episodes that I wrote for Deke.
Oh.
Because I just didn't want to have my heart broken.
Deke is very different.
Very different.
Feel and everything right now. For me, I was a bit older, more able to just say, I want that for Christmas, rather than having other people decide for me. But the cartoon for me that's always held my heart is Sunbow, even if it was much earlier in my childhood and I never got to see a lot of it on first run syndication or first run airing. So yeah. Well, awesome. I mean, we've been here for about an hour and 10 minutes, and it's about the amount of time I thought this would take. But is there anything else that you want to discuss, like where people can find you on social media? I know you mentioned some upcoming convention appearances. Is there anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, right now, they can find me on Facebook. I think just under my name on Instagram. I think it's Cold Slither 01.
That's the one. Yeah.
I created quite a coincidence, actually, but last year I created a Cold Slither concert poster, 11 by 17, and it's a one night only 40th anniversary reunion on December 2nd, 2025 at Cobra Casino Resort on Cobra Island. So I created a fictitious website where to purchase tickets. I own the domain name, but I have yet to do anything with it. So if you
That's amazing.
If you ever get that poster, don't which I'll take with me to DFW show.
Awesome. Well, say hi to Greg and the boys. He was talking to him last year. He was thinking about asking Delta 17 to come along, but we weren't able to make it work. Like, okay, do we just hang out there after Joe Fest for a week, or do we fly back to Canada and then present our passports again and transport everything back? Like, how do we do this, right? So it was just complicated enough to be outside of our scope. We wish we could be there. Now that you're going to be there, I'm really going to wish I could be there. But Joe, our buddy John from Emerald Knight Photos lives right in the DFW area. We could, I'm sure we could, at least send a friend to come spend time with Michael a little bit. So, yeah, but you'll have plenty to do there now that your name is sort of finally, deservedly, after all these years, making the rounds. And, you're not being left in the lobby with a Devcon figure. I feel so bad that was your first taste of the fandom. And it was nearly a decade before they finally were like, "Hey, remember the guy that wrote Cold Slither? Yeah, he's around, eh? Yeah, like." Oh my God, thought process. All right. Before I lose my mind here, thanks everyone in the chat who tuned in, and I know a bunch of you said you'll tune in on the replay because a lot of people are either at ZoloCon or New York Toy Fair as we speak right now, or they're having beers after the show or whatever. I want to thank Joe for helping to host this and for the amazing backdrop behind him, and
you
Michael
did all the work.
No, it's fine. It's cool. Glad you're here. And to Michael for generously loaning his time, for being responsive to fans. Like, we don't have to wait a month and a half and go through, multiple loops of agents to get a hold of you. I'll be like, "Hey, Michael," and you'll be like, "Hey, Ken," and I'll be like, "Just like talking to one of your friends."
Yeah, I, for convention appearances and stuff like that. It's just me. I don't have an agent or a team or anything like that. So yeah, just send me a message on Facebook if you already have my email address, send it there. And
Yep. And before we wrap up, if you do want to make more podcast appearances and you want to just and you just want a list of ones to go through, I'd be happy, and Joe would be happy to put you in touch with people as well. We might just have them message you directly because you're responsive to that point.
I don't think I've turned anyone down, and if I did, it was because I wasn't available at the time, and I said I'd get back to them, and I might not have. But yeah, I'm open to doing as many and as often as people are interested in having me on.
Awesome. And like Joe, maybe we could put this out there. Podcast from the Pit, our good friends there, they had a show this morning.
Yeah.
I have a feeling they'd be thrilled to have you on. Punk with Toys, Lawrence, I imagine he'd be good. I was going to mention Needless Things, but you've already gone down that road. So okay, I'll just ask them to message you directly, and
okay.
And if it sounds like you're willing, able, and friendly with everyone, so awesome. Okay, cool. Let's end this before I could sit here all day, so we may as well leave the conversation as is and say goodbye to everyone, because I've had a lot of fun.
We can do a part 2 down the road.
I would love to do that. So
okay.
Thanks very much. All right, thanks everyone for joining in, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks guys.